The broadcast had barely begun when the temperature in the studio dropped. The special live debate between American political commentator Karoline Leavitt and Canadian economist and former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney was supposed to be a civil discussion on economic alliances and transnational cooperation. Hosted on a major international news channel, it was billed as a chance to examine North American unity in times of global instability. But no one expected what followed, a clash so tense, so fiery, that clips would dominate headlines and social media. Within the hour, Leavitt, confident and combative as ever, opened with jabs aimed squarely at Canada's political system. Frankly, she said with a smirk, Canada's just the US with maple syrup and fewer rights. You follow, you don't lead. Asterisks could be heard from the production team behind the cameras. Carney's eyebrows twitched just slightly, but he remained composed. The moderator shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene. Leavitt continued, "You've got socialized healthcare that fails your citizens, carbon taxes that bankrupt families, and a government that seems more obsessed with woke politics than actual progress, and don't even get me started on your prime minister." The audience, a live studio crowd mixed with Americans and Canadians, murmured loudly. Leavitt had not just questioned policy, she had insulted an entire country's identity. Her words hung in the air, smug and unrelenting. Carney turned toward her, leaned slightly forward, and finally spoke, "I see." Carney said coolly that we've exchanged diplomacy for stand-up comedy this morning. The crowd chuckled nervously, but since we're dealing with facts, not caricatures, let's correct a few things. Canadians have a higher life expectancy than Americans. Our literacy rate is higher, our crime rate is lower, and despite our failing healthcare, no one in Canada goes bankrupt because they broke their arm. That may not be flashy, Karoline, but to many, that's called dignity. The crowd roared, the moderator's eyes widened, and Leavitt's expression hardened. But Carney wasn't done. "You say we follow." Yet during the 2008 crisis, it was Canada's financial system that led the world in stability. And during the pandemic, we saw less economic contraction than the US saw, meaning we outperformed. Maybe the US should consider it, asterisk. Leavitt tried to interrupt. But Carney pressed on, his tone sharpening. "What's truly dangerous isn't disagreement. It's contempt disguised as commentary. You mock our values while standing on a stage that wouldn't exist without cross-border cooperation. Canada is America's largest trading partner. We share military operations, climate goals, and intelligence networks. You don't insult your teammate on live television and expect unity. Unless, of course, your goal is division, not discourse." The room erupted in applause. It was clear the dynamic had shifted. Leavitt sat back, her talking points shattered by the one thing she hadn't prepared for, a masterclass in calm, factual rebuttal from a man who didn't need volume to be heard. The moderator, sensing a rare moment of unscripted gravity, wisely stepped back to let the scene unfold. Karoline Leavitt, visibly rattled but unwilling to surrender the spotlight, attempted to steer the conversation back in her favor. "Oh, come on," she said, forcing a laugh. "Are we really pretending that Canada's economy is thriving? Please. Your GDP is laughable compared to ours. Your energy sector is collapsing under liberal regulations. You may have the market cornered on politeness, but that's hardly a benchmark of leadership." The smugness in her voice tried to disguise the tension in her shoulders. But Carney, unfazed, turned slightly to face her with the quiet composure of a professor addressing a student who hadn't done her homework, asterisk, with all due respect. Carney replied, "When you reduce a nation's value to raw GDP, you reveal more about your worldview than ours. Quality of life matters. Sustainability matters. Canada ranks higher than the US in global happiness indexes, education metrics, and access to basic social services. And let's talk about energy. Wow. We invest in a diversified and forward-looking energy mix. The US remains tethered to fossil fuel lobbying. You see collapse. I see transition. But perhaps nuance isn't a strength. In your playbook. The crowd's reaction was thunderous. It wasn't just Canadians who were impressed. Many Americans watching live felt the burn of their own system. Being held under the light, as the exchange gained intensity, newsrooms across North America scrambled to capture the moment. On social media, hashtags like #Carney Clapback and #Leavitt vs Canada exploded in real time. Clips of Carney's elegant rebuttal circulated alongside memes of Leavitt blinking awkwardly, her brow furrowing as if trying to formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse. But no matter what she said next, it was too late. The narrative had already flipped. Carney wasn't just defending Canada, he was exposing the shallow tactics of performative punditry. His poise, his statistics, his command of tone and timing. And everything else landed with precision. It wasn't loud, but it was lethal. Leavitt attempted one final dig, questioning whether Canada was too soft to lead in a world that respects strength. But Carney didn't bite. Instead, he delivered the sentence that silenced the room. True strength, he said, isn't about who shouts loudest, it's about who listens longest and leads with clarity, not contempt. If compassion is weakness, then perhaps the world needs more of it. With that, the studio fell into a stunned silence. The moment was cinematic. Leavitt, out of counter-punches, looked down at her notes, her expression betraying what her words no longer could hide: defeat. Not because she lost a debate, but because she had underestimated the power of dignity under fire. The impact was instantaneous. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, major media outlets began publishing headlines like "Mark Carney silences Karoline Leavitt in epic live debate" and "Canadian dignity crushes American arrogance." Political analysts on both sides of the border weighed in, some calling it one of the most lopsided live confrontations in recent memory. What stunned viewers the most wasn't just the substance of Carney's rebuttal, it was the restraint. While Leavitt came armed with mockery and volume, Carney came armed with data, history, and unwavering grace. He hadn't just won a debate, he had dismantled an entire rhetorical strategy based on cheap shots and talking points. Public's response added fuel to the media fire. Canadians flooded social platforms with praise for Carney's composure and integrity, with many noting how rare it was to see their country so fiercely and eloquently defended on the global stage. American viewers, even those not typically aligned with Carney's ideology, admitted that Leavitt had overplayed her hand. Clips of the moment racked up millions of views within hours. Attempted a redemption tour. She appeared on several partisan news shows, defending her remarks as intentionally provocative to stir necessary dialogue, but the explanation rang hollow. Voters, viewers, and even colleagues saw it for what it was: backpedaling. Her credibility took a measurable hit in polls, and her campaign donations slowed. Several prominent figures on her side of the aisle, while stopping short of full C.